Let's talk about something nobody wants to touch, not because it's irrelevant, but because it's raw, uncomfortable, and drenched in truths that society likes to ignore. Why do so many sex workers hate men? Not all of them do, but many carry a deep buried anger, not because they were born bitter, not because they don't understand men. In fact, they understand men too well. That's the problem. When you spend your life being consumed physically, emotionally, transactionally, by men who don't see you as a full human being, it does something to your heart. It creates a wound that keeps bleeding, even while you're smiling. Because when a woman is paid for pleasure, she sees a side of men that most women never do. Not the polished gentleman, not the provider, and not the protector. She sees the hidden cravings, the brokenness, the hypocrisy. She sees the man who preaches morality at church and then visits her at night. She sees the married man who talks about loyalty on social media, but has no problem throwing his wedding ring in the glove box before entering her room. She's seen it all, and the more she sees, the more she disconnects from the idea that love from a man is pure. Sex workers aren't naive. Most didn't start out hating men. They didn't wake up one day and decide to give up on real intimacy. Many of them began with hope. They believed in love, they believed in men, until experience taught them otherwise. Let me tell you something honest. When a woman gives her body without love, something in her soul begins to die. She may not notice it the first time, or the 10th, but eventually, the touch that once felt human begins to feel mechanical. The compliments that once made her feel beautiful now feel scripted, and the eyes that look at her aren't looking at her. They're looking at a fantasy, a product, an object. So why do sex workers hate men? Because for many of them, men stopped looking at them as people. When you're treated like a body, you start to believe that's all you are. And when you believe that, you stop expecting respect. You stop expecting tenderness. You stop expecting truth. And guess what? You stop giving it too, not because you don't want to, but because self-preservation becomes your only shield. Because how many times can a woman fake a smile? How many times can she listen to a man's sob story, his complaints about his wife, his fantasies, his lies, and still feel whole? Eventually, she becomes numb, and behind that numbness is a quiet rage. Rage from being used. Rage from being forgotten the moment the money hits the table. Rage from carrying the shame that society places on her, while the men who come to her walk away untouched. Let's be real. Society is quick to condemn women in this line of work. They're judged, insulted, degraded. But the men who fuel the demand, they get to stay anonymous. They get to be family men. They get to have careers, reputations, respect. But her, she's labeled forever, and that double standard, that's where the hate begins. It's not about hating men simply for being men. It's about hating the system that allows men to take, to hide, to lie, while women are the ones who carry the weight, the trauma, and the label. Think about it. When a man sleeps around, he's called a player. When a woman does, even if she's doing it to survive, she's called a whore. So what happens when she decides to embrace the label, use it to earn, and shut down her feelings in the process? She becomes emotionally unavailable. She becomes cold. She becomes cynical. And behind that wall is a storm of disappointment. And it's not just physical disgust. It's emotional exhaustion. Because some of these men don't want just sex. They want therapy. They want attention. They want someone to listen, to praise them, to validate them. And guess what? They want it without offering real love in return. They want to dump their problems, escape their reality, and then leave. What does that make her? A vessel for release, not a woman, not a soul, just an outlet. So yes, some sex workers hate men, not because they're heartless, but because they've had to carry the emotional weight of men who never offered them anything real. No loyalty, no future, no love, just need. And it's worse when the lines get blurred, when the man pretends he cares, when he acts like she's different, when he tells her she's special, only to disappear when the fantasy fades. That betrayal cuts deeper than any insult, because deep down, most women in this world, even those in the darkest industries, want one thing: to be seen, to be loved, to be valued for more than what they offer. But when your worth is tied to a price, when your value is reduced to performance, when your name is forgotten but your body is remembered, how can you not feel resentment? How can you not start to see men as takers? And the most dangerous part, when you start believing you have to play the same game, that you have to manipulate, use, deceive, just to protect yourself, that's where the cycle repeats. That's where the hate becomes mutual. That's where trust dies. And here's the sad part most people ignore. Many sex workers were hurt long before they ever entered the industry. Many were abused, abandoned, exploited. And now they meet men who don't ask about their pain, who don't see their past, who don't care about their dreams. They only care about the now, about what they can get. So why do some sex workers hate men? Because men are often the face of their trauma, the continuation of a story that began long before the first transaction. The world failed them, and now the men they serve only deepen the wound. It's not about demonizing every man. It's about understanding why a woman might close her heart, why she might look at a man and feel anger before she feels trust, why she might build walls so high no one can reach her soul anymore. Because after years of giving and never receiving, after being touched but never held, after being heard but never understood, can you really blame her? You see, when a woman gives her body for a living but never gets love in return, her heart starts to rot. And what replaces it is something darker, something guarded, something bitter. It's not hate, it's survival dressed in steel. So the next time someone asks, why are so many sex workers angry at men, understand this: it's not just about sex. It's about being stripped of humanity. It's about feeling invisible outside of desire. It's about being treated like a tool and then thrown away like trash. It's about giving everything, but never being chosen. Every woman wants to be chosen, not used, not rented, chosen. And when you've never been chosen, when men only come to you in the dark, when they never claim you in the light, hate becomes easier than hope. There's a difference between being seen and being used, and every sex worker learns that difference the hard way, not in theory, but in experience, through touches that don't ask permission, through conversations that are one-sided, through expectations that come wrapped in entitlement. It's not just her body that gets bought, it's her boundaries. Her soul becomes background noise in a world that only listens to desire. And what people don't understand is that the greatest damage isn't physical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, it's the slow erasure of the self. At first, she tries to hold on to something real, some sense of identity, a name, a boundary, a memory of who she was before this started. But little by little, men begin to strip that away, not always with violence. Most of them don't even raise their voices, but silence can be violent. Indifference can wound deeper than any slap. And when a man looks through her, past her, around her, but never directly into her, she starts to vanish in her own skin. It begins with how they speak to her, not with care, but with assumption, as if she belongs to them the moment they pay. As if the transaction removes a right to say no, or to feel, or to matter. They don't ask if she's okay, they ask what she'll do. They don't ask who she is, they ask for performance, and the more that happens, the more she detaches. Because how do you trust someone who doesn't see you as human? How do you build connection with a man who sees you as a service? They want her to play roles, fantasies, scenarios, but never herself. Her real thoughts are irrelevant. Her emotions are inconvenient. Her pain is dismissed as weakness, so she learns to edit, to filter, to suppress. She becomes a chameleon, not by choice, but by survival, because if she shows her real self, she risks rejection. Or worse, ridicule, and after a while, pretending becomes her only armor. But even armor cracks under pressure. Men often talk about wanting connection. They say they want honesty, depth, authenticity. But when they come to her, what they truly want is control, not connection. They want someone to submit without challenge, to serve without question. And when she dares to speak up, to draw a line, to express discomfort, they call her difficult, moody, cold. But what they don't understand is that every time she gives in to that control, a piece of her trust dies. Trust isn't built in comfort, it's built in conflict, in how someone treats you when you say no, when you cry, when you're not perfect, and when every man she meets punishes her for being human. Trust becomes impossible. It doesn't matter how sweet his voice is, how much he tips, how many compliments he gives. If he doesn't treat her with dignity, he becomes just another face in the gallery of users. The worst part is that many of these men think they're good. They think they're being generous by listening to her talk for 10 minutes. They think they're different because they don't hit her, but that's the bare minimum of humanity. She doesn't need a savior. She needs someone who sees her as equal, not someone who plays God while feeding off her brokenness. Every man who dehumanizes her adds to the wound, not just his own damage, but the accumulation of every man before him. The ones who took too much, the ones who pretended to care, the ones who said, "You're safe with me," and then violated her safety anyway. And when you carry the weight of repeated betrayal, your back bends. Your spirit stoops, and eventually your trust collapses. They tell her she's jaded, that she has trust issues, that she's too guarded, but they never ask why. They don't want the truth, because the truth is inconvenient. It forces them to look in the mirror, to question how many times they've contributed to that numbness, and most men can't handle that level of accountability. So instead, they blame her for the wall she built, without acknowledging they were the ones who drove her to build it. Emotional exploitation is subtle. It's not always loud. Sometimes it comes wrapped in flattery, in manipulation, in the illusion of care. A man may act interested, ask questions, seem attentive, but deep down his motives aren't clean. He wants access. He wants compliance. And once he gets what he wants, his energy shifts. His tone changes. His interest evaporates. And she's left holding the silence he leaves behind. That kind of pattern changes a woman. It teaches her not to believe the first kind word, not to fall for attention, not to confuse temporary comfort with real care. And the longer she's exposed to that manipulation, the more she starts to believe that all affection is conditional, that love always has a price, that every kind gesture is a prelude to a demand. And when a woman starts to believe that, something dies inside her, not her ability to love, but her ability to receive love. Because love requires trust, and trust cannot survive in a mind that's been trained to expect betrayal. Dehumanization is not just about how someone treats your body, it's about how they treat your story, your voice, your emotions. A man who makes her feel invisible when she speaks is just as abusive as one who crosses physical boundaries, because emotional neglect is trauma too, and when it happens again and again, she stops speaking altogether. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she knows no one's listening. You can't fake respect, you can't fake empathy, and you can't fake safety. A woman knows when she's being tolerated versus when she's being cherished. And most of the men who enter her life don't cherish her. They consume her like a product, like a fantasy, like something to escape into, but never commit to, and that kind of consumption leaves marks. Not on her skin, but on her soul. Every time a man praises her for being easy to talk to, but ghosts her afterward, she learns a lesson. Every time a man says, "I feel like I can be myself with you," but never asks who she is, she learns a lesson. Every time a man cries in her arms but never checks if she's okay, she learns a lesson, and those lessons accumulate into walls, into detachment, into the cold, unshakable knowledge that most men only care about their own healing, not hers. Trust is not about words. It's about consistency, presence, respect in the smallest interactions. And when a man undresses her body but ignores her tears, he teaches her not to trust. When he confesses his guilt but does nothing to change, he teaches her not to hope. When he takes without giving, speaks without listening, touches without permission, he teaches her that her value ends where his desire begins. And once that message becomes internalized, it's hard to undo. She starts expecting pain, bracing for disappointment, numbing herself before the betrayal even happens, not because she wants to, but because it hurts less when you're not fully there. Emotional exploitation rewires her brain, her nervous system, her heart. She starts to associate closeness with danger, vulnerability with risk, and trust. Trust becomes a fairy tale she stopped believing in long ago. It's not bitterness, it's self-protection. It's the body's way of saying, no more pretending, no more performing, no more giving to men who take like it's their right. She didn't choose this cynicism. It was forced on her by men who called themselves nice but acted like predators. Who smiled while wounding, who touched with cold hands and colder intentions. So when you meet a woman who doesn't trust easily, who questions everything, who keeps her distance, it's not because she's broken. It's because she's been broken over and over again by men who said all the right things and did all the wrong ones, by a world that praised their charm and ignored their cruelty. Dehumanization isn't just an act, it's a system, a culture, a disease passed from one man to another. And until men choose to see her not as a service, not as a body, not as a secret, but as a full, complex human being, trust will remain a myth, because no woman can trust someone who refuses to treat her with basic humanity. And that is the cost, that is the weight, that is the truth she carries behind her eyes even when she smiles. There's a reason why women don't speak. There's a reason why silence becomes a survival mechanism. Because when a woman tells the truth, society doesn't just ignore her, it crucifies her. It calls her names, questions her motives, and shames her into submission. But when a man breaks the rules, the world makes excuses for him. It justifies his actions, it downplays the damage, and that imbalance is not an accident. It's a system that protects male power and punishes female truth. Look around. When a man uses a woman, he's called a player. When a woman reclaims her agency, she's called names we don't even repeat in public. The double standard isn't subtle, it's institutionalized. He gets a pat on the back for the same behavior that gets her labeled as damaged. And the weight of that hypocrisy sits heavy on the chest of every woman who has ever been judged for doing what men do freely. A man can make mistakes and still be considered a good guy. He can lie, cheat, disappear, and come back, and society will say he's just figuring things out. But when a woman slips, even once, she's branded for life. Her worth is measured in purity, not resilience. Her identity becomes reduced to the worst thing that ever happened to her. And no matter how much she grows, society keeps dragging her back to that moment. When a woman speaks about being exploited, people don't ask what happened to her. They ask what she was wearing. They ask why she was there. They ask if she said no loud enough. They dissect her decisions. They blame her for the violence done to her. But when a man is accused, suddenly it's about protecting his future, his career, his reputation. No one stops to consider the damage he caused, only the inconvenience he's facing. And that's the sickness. This idea that men's potential matters more than women's pain, that their redemption deserves more protection than her trauma deserves recognition. And so women learn early: if you speak, you suffer. If you expose the truth, you pay the price. The burden isn't just what happened to her, it's the backlash that follows. Think about the sex worker. Society shames her for the very things it celebrates in men. She's judged for her choices, but no one judges the men who buy her time. He walks away untouched, unspoken of, unseen. She carries the weight of the interaction, not just emotionally, but socially. Her reputation suffers. Her dignity is questioned, but the man, he gets to disappear into the crowd like he was never there. Men are allowed to be complex, flawed, messy, and still be respected, but women are expected to be flawless or else be discarded. If she's too sexual, she's shameful. If she's too quiet, she's weak. If she's too strong, she's intimidating. If she's too emotional, she's unstable. There is no version of womanhood that is safe from criticism. No expression of her truth that doesn't come with a price. And when society punishes women for trying to survive, it teaches them that silence is safer than honesty, that compliance is safer than resistance, that numbness is safer than feeling. So women start to adapt. They learn to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, to carry guilt for the choices men force them to make. And the worst part, the world tells them it's empowerment, that they're lucky to be tolerated at all. There's a lie we tell girls, that if you just behave, you'll be protected, that if you follow the rules, you'll be respected. But that's not how the game is played. Because even the most obedient woman can be targeted. Even the most conservative woman can be shamed. Even the kindest, most loving woman can be discarded. Respectability doesn't save you when the system is designed to protect the abuser. Every time a woman is punished for speaking up, another woman learns to stay quiet. Every time a man walks away from accountability, another woman learns that her pain doesn't matter, and the cycle continues. Not because women are weak, but because society keeps breaking them down while uplifting the ones who broke them. And don't think it only happens in the shadows. It happens in boardrooms, courtrooms, classrooms, churches, and dinner tables. It happens when a man gets promoted despite harassment claims, when a father tells his daughter not to provoke boys, when a pastor tells a woman to stay in a marriage that's destroying her soul. It happens when people look the other way because he's a good guy deep down. But why does society protect men like this? Because male power fuels the system. Because keeping women afraid keeps them easier to control. And when a woman steps outside the role she's been assigned, whether that's through sex work, independence, assertiveness, or survival, society sees her as a threat, not because she's wrong, but because she's free. Freedom scares people. A woman who knows her worth, who refuses to be ashamed, who calls out injustice. That woman is dangerous to the status quo, and so they try to silence her through shame, through labels. Through punishment, they want her to believe she's the problem, but she's not. She never was. The problem is a culture that rewards the predator and punishes the prey. You want to know why some women become cold, detached, why they stop trusting, loving, or hoping. It's because they've been betrayed not just by men, but by systems, by structures that were supposed to protect them. The police didn't listen. The court didn't believe them. The family didn't support them. The community didn't care. And that kind of abandonment leaves scars deeper than any individual act. You can't heal in a world that keeps reopening the wound. And that's what society does to women every single day. It tells them to move on while still blaming them for what happened. It tells them to forgive while still ignoring their pain. It tells them to rise above while still standing on their neck. And the men who do harm, they get second chances and third and fourth. Because apparently a man's potential is more sacred than a woman's truth. His ego is more fragile than her reality. His future is more valuable than her dignity. And that is the real injustice, that women have to be perfect victims just to be believed, while men only have to deny it once to be protected. It's not just about justice, it's about culture, about the messages we teach our sons, about the silence we demand from our daughters, about the way we romanticize male aggression and pathologize female resistance. Society grooms women to tolerate abuse and then blames them for staying. It teaches them to endure pain and then criticizes them for being bitter. But the bitterness is not weakness, it is memory. It is the body remembering how many times it's been betrayed. It is the spirit refusing to forget the cost of survival. And until society stops punishing women for the crimes committed against them, that bitterness will remain, not as poison, but as protection. A woman doesn't hate men because she wants to. She hates the system that makes men untouchable. She hates the silence that follows abuse. She hates the way people justify the inexcusable, and eventually she starts to associate men with that injustice, not because every man is guilty, but because too many are and too few are held accountable. That's the real tragedy, that women are left to carry not only the trauma, but the consequences of exposing it, that they must risk their safety, their sanity, their reputation, just to be heard, and even then, society still finds a way to blame them, still finds a way to protect the man, still finds a way to say, "But what did she do?" So don't ask why women are angry. Don't ask why they've stopped trusting. Don't ask why they build walls instead of bridges. Ask yourself what kind of world makes them feel like that's the only way to survive. Ask yourself why a man's comfort has always been more important than a woman's truth. Ask yourself who benefits from keeping women small, and then be brave enough to challenge it. Because until we stop punishing women for existing outside the lines, we will never have justice. We will only have silence dressed up as peace, and too many women have bled in that silence already. Every woman carries a longing within her, deep, quiet, often unspoken. It's not the desire to be perfect or praised or pedestalized. It's the desire to be chosen, not for convenience, not for fantasy, but for who she really is. She wants to be seen, heard, understood, and more than anything, she wants to matter. But in a world that's trained men to take without giving, to touch without connecting, and to pursue without committing, that desire gets twisted, mocked, and ultimately betrayed. No woman walks into intimacy hoping to be disposable. She doesn't dream of becoming a pit stop in someone else's journey. She wants to be someone's destination. But the tragedy is that many women have been taught to settle for attention instead of affection, for lust instead of love, for moments instead of meaning, not because they're weak, but because they've been conditioned to believe that this is the best they'll get. From an early age, society tells women their worth lies in their ability to attract. To be wanted is glorified, but no one teaches them how to be valued, so they learn to perform, to please, to shape, shift. They mold themselves to fit into male desires, hoping, quietly, that maybe if they play the part long enough, someone will finally choose them not just for their body, but for their soul. But too often, that hope gets weaponized against them. Because men learn to say what women want to hear, they learn to mirror their dreams, mimic their morals, and manipulate their boundaries, not because they're searching for something sacred, but because they know how to unlock what they don't intend to keep. And the woman, desperate to be seen, mistakes performance for presence. She gives, she trusts, she opens, only to be left with silence, confusion, and shame. And this shame, this deep, guttural ache, is not because she made a mistake. It's because she thought it was real, she thought she mattered, she thought she was being chosen, but in reality she was only being used, not for who she is, but for what she could offer in that moment. Her softness, her warmth, her beauty, her vulnerability, taken, consumed, and forgotten like she was never more than a temporary thrill, and the world has the audacity to call her naive, to laugh at her pain, to say, "You should have known better." But how could she have known when all she wanted was something pure, when all she hoped for was to be loved without needing to compete, prove, or earn it? That's not weakness, that's humanity. That's the sacred core of every woman's soul, crying out to be held without having to break first. Women don't want to be strong all the time. They don't want to always be guarded, calculating, suspicious. But they become that way when they realize that their love is being used like a resource, like something to be mined and discarded. They become emotionally distant not because they don't care, but because they cared too much for too long without anything real in return. A woman who has been used loses her sense of self, worth in ways you can't see on the surface. She starts questioning her instincts. Was it my fault? Did I lead him on? Did I ask for too much? She starts bargaining with her dignity. Maybe if I give more, stay longer, shrink quieter, he'll finally see me, but he doesn't, because he was never looking to see her. He was only looking to satisfy himself, and that's what breaks her, not the leaving, but the realization that he never really arrived in the first place. That while she was emotionally invested, he was only temporarily entertained. That while she was imagining a future, he was calculating how long he could keep her without giving anything back. It's a different kind of heartbreak, one that doesn't just end a relationship, but ends the part of her that believed love was safe. So many women walk around with this invisible grief, the grief of being used when all they wanted was to be chosen. The grief of realizing that their heart was treated like a transaction, that their emotional labor, their loyalty, their openness, it was all consumed and never appreciated, and instead of being held through that grief, they're mocked for having it. They're told to move on, level up, stop being so emotional. But how do you move on from something that didn't just break you? It made you question your entire identity. The saddest part is, most men have no idea what they take when they use a woman like that. They don't realize they're not just touching a body, they're impacting a soul. They're shaping how she views herself, how she trusts the world, how she approaches future love, and yet they walk away like nothing happened. They sleep peacefully while she lies awake, wondering if she's too much or not enough. And this isn't just about romantic relationships. It's about the culture, the media, the music, the mindset. Everything teaches men to pursue women like prizes to be won, not people to be cherished. Women become props in someone else's narrative. Their stories, their struggles, their dignity, flattened into a fantasy that ends when the man gets what he wants, and then she's left to clean up the emotional mess alone. And don't think for a second that this doesn't have consequences. That kind of repeated betrayal creates emotional trauma. It teaches women to doubt sincerity, to fear vulnerability, to suppress their softness because the world treats it like weakness. They start building emotional walls with no doors, not because they want to be cold, but because warmth got them burned. But beneath that armor, the desire still lives, the desire to be chosen authentically, intentionally, not for a night, not for a thrill, not for ego, but for love, for respect, for partnership. And she keeps that desire alive in secret, even if the world tells her it's foolish. Because no matter how many times she's been used, some part of her still believes that being chosen is possible, that being loved without a gender is still worth hoping for. She dreams of a day when she doesn't have to perform to be loved, when she doesn't have to explain her pain or shrink her standards or hide her history. She dreams of a man who doesn't just want her body, but wants her story, her mind, her scars, her fire. She dreams of being met, not managed. Understood, not tolerated. Chosen, not used. And until that day comes, she learns how to choose herself, how to stop accepting half love from men who never intended to stay, how to stop chasing closure from people who were never open. She reclaims her time, her energy, her power. She learns that being alone is better than being used. That solitude can be sacred when the alternative is emotional robbery. And when she finally chooses herself, something beautiful happens. She stops begging for crumbs. She stops proving her worth. She stops twisting herself into shapes that please others. And in that freedom, she becomes whole, not because someone saved her, but because she stopped letting people exploit her hunger for love. So let the world call her cold. Let the men say she's too much or too guarded now, because only she knows what it took to rebuild herself after being used. Only she knows the war she fought to keep her heart from going numb. Only she knows the quiet strength it takes to keep desiring real love in a world that keeps offering counterfeits. Because no matter how many times she's been used, she still believes in being chosen. In that belief, that hope, that is not weakness, that is her power.